Welcome to Bedhampton Church. Contact us at www.bedhampton.church. But for now, let's continue that journey with this input.
Are there any teachers or ex-teachers in the church today? No? Got one, two, behind me as well. I'd learned this great trick when I was a very young parent from a teacher, actually, a friend of mine called Mike. And I learnt this from the way he interacted with my children. And I used it the whole time my children were growing up. And we used to have a situation that might go something like this. Becky, my eldest, might come to me and say, "Dad, my lamp in my bedroom is broken." And I would say, "Well, fix it." And she would say, "But Dad, I don't know how to. I can't fix it." And then I would say something along the lines of, "Well, if you did know, what would be the first thing you'd do?" And then she inevitably would come up with something and she would work it out, and just with a little bit of input from me, we would together fix whatever it was or solve whatever she couldn't do. I wonder about you. What is it that you can't do? Do you listen to the untruths as you say to yourself the lie, "I can't do it"? What is it, I wonder? Today, as we continue this wander through the Gospel of Matthew, we come across this very, very familiar story, don't we? But it's so laden with more teaching than perhaps we're used to for those of us who want to follow Jesus, want to become an apprentice of his. Yes, Jesus is beginning to reveal his miraculous power, his divine majesty, his divinity, if you will. But there is way more than that. Way more than that than just feeding 5,000 from a little bit of shopping. As an aside, did you notice Matthew, a man of his time, only acknowledges the men to start with? You know that one, don't you? 5,000. But Jesus, who is God of all time, acknowledges and feeds not just the 5,000 men, but the women and the children as well. You see, it doesn't matter if the world chooses to ignore you for one reason or another. The God of the universe sees you and acknowledges you and acknowledges your worth. Like I say, an aside. Because Jesus also teaches us much more from this as well. And he does this like this. We find Jesus, don't we, getting into a boat. It says, when Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew to a boat privately to a solitary place. If you remember, just before this, John the Baptizer has been killed in perhaps one of the most horrendous ways for the most ridiculous of reasons, for entertainment's sake, beheaded at a party. John the Baptizer, the cousin of Jesus, the dear friend of Jesus. And Jesus, and we could take some note of this as well, Jesus recognizes that he needs some time to mourn, to regather, to reconnect with his Father, and withdraws to a solitary place. He does this quite a lot throughout the Gospels, and people like me don't acknowledge that, and we need to. He withdraws to a quiet place. So now he can finally have that time with him and his Father, except, of course, hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. No rest for the holy. So what is the response of Jesus? Is it a bit like your rector? Today's my day off, do you mind? Give me a break. Does he get angry and frustrated? No, he doesn't, does he? When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed those who were ill. He doesn't get angry, he doesn't get frustrated, he just has compassion on the people. And then later on, no doubt, after he's been healing people and no doubt doing some teaching, the disciples come to him and say, with this problem. This is a remote place. It's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. Dad, my lamp is broken. Jesus' answer is simple. They don't need to go away. You feed them. You give them something to eat, he says. You do it. But Dad, we can't do it. We can't do it. We've only got 2 fish, a couple of loaves of bread. At that point, I'm half expecting Jesus to say, well, if you could do it, what would you do first, But he doesn't, does he? Not quite. Instead, he demonstrates. Bring them here to me, he said. And then he tells the people to sit on the grass, and he feeds the 5,000, the 10,000, the 15,000, whatever group it is, of people there. And I think for us in Bedhampton today, as we regather as a group of God's people here, as we look to see what it means to do mission here, the point of this is not the miracle. We know Jesus is a miracle maker. We know that already. The point for us today, I don't believe, is even that he has compassion in his lowest, darkest times on us. He goes on to hang on the cross for us. We know he loves us. The point here today for me is actually the disciples. This group of misfits that we see, the carpenters, the fishermen, the tax collectors, a group of working class misfits who look around the area in which they're in and have compassion on the men, the women and the children. People who frankly should have brought their own picnic, because look, it wasn't that they didn't know what they were doing and there was no shop around. Perhaps they don't even deserve to be fed, but they have compassion on them. And so they take them to Jesus, and his response is, let me show you how. Let me show you how you can reach these people. And of course, as with Jesus, the response is overflowing grace, overflowing love, overflowing abundance. They all ate and were satisfied. And still, they find 12 baskets of spare food. They end up finishing off with more, way more, than they started with. I'm sure we could dive down into all sorts of avenues about why there were 12 and the tribes, etc., but that's not the point for me today. The point seems to be that when the people stepped up, Jesus responded. Because our psalm that we heard, we could have just meditated on the psalm that Anne read so well, but the psalm we heard talks about the power of God, doesn't it? And yet he still loves us. I'd go home and reread that psalm and understand that this God is awesome, who is all-powerful, who created the universe, who has the power to snuff us out like that, instead loves us so much that he comes for us. So what about you? What's your excuse, I wonder? Too old? Too young? Too weak? Too ill? Too jaded? Too tired? I think Jesus would say, what would you do first? I can do all things for him who strengthens me. We read elsewhere in the Bible. Often that's a abused and misused line. But what it means is, it's not about us. It's about us coming to Jesus with the compassion, the willing heart that we see, and for him responding. We're not going to suddenly leap tall buildings in one bound just because we quote, I have the power through Jesus. But Jesus will turn his people towards him. The only requirement that you and I have here right now is to have a compassionate heart and a willing heart. And when you and I individually do that, I believe God will use us as a church. And right now, as we look around us, whether it's here in Bedhampton or back home in Scotland or wherever you're from elsewhere, there are people who are hurting. Men, women, children who are hurting. in our villages, in our towns, in our schools, in our workplaces, in our clubs? Are we going to simply say, well, we can't do it in our own right, I don't know what to do? Or are we going to turn to God and say, I know the first thing I can do? Lead us on.
You have been listening to Bedhampton Church. Our prayer is that this helps you journey with Jesus and serve your community by sharing God's love and friendship. Subscribe and join us for more discussion at www.bedhampton.church. All material Creative Commons copyright. Contact us for more details.